He tracked my location to a private beach and caught me with someone before I even saw him.
Hello, Redditors. I'm about to talk about how I went from a perfect, successful daughter and a perfect wife to a person of disgrace and infidelity. My name is Freya. Please don't judge me too harshly as you listen to my story. I will try to tell it properly so you all can understand and maybe learn something from my greed. Yes, I was greedy and I paid for it dearly. My father had a look of absolute disgust on his face as he looked down at my kneeling frame from where he sat on his favorite seat in the living room of our family house. The whole family was present and I was in the middle of the circle that they formed, kneeling like a middle schooler on punishment, while they looked at me with disappointment and disgust as a recording played through my older brother's phone. It was a video, and the audio of the blasted video had a very familiar voice talking and moaning like a top-class witch in the background. My brother's phone was connected to a small Bluetooth player device so the whole house could hear it. My mother was crying and my 3 sisters looked about ready to slap me while my 2 brothers were probably planning to go find that man in the video and pummel him into the ground. Well, pummel me into the ground too, though.
Yep.
My father opened the family meeting by first pointing out that I was a disgrace to the family name and a stain to our lineage for my shameful actions and asking if I had anything to say for myself. I looked to the side in shame, biting on my lips hard enough to draw blood because I was ashamed of my actions and the shame of getting caught so horribly that even my family had become aware of my secret dealings. What led to this, you might be asking, so I'll give you a bit of the story. Winston and I were a couple. We had been married for 7 years and we had only 2 children, a pair of twins. We did not want more too soon because we were both ambitious youngsters who had tied the knot pretty early in life because we did not want to lose the other, but we were also not yet through with achieving our dreams and aspirations. So we decided to put childbearing on hold. I had gotten an IUD to prevent any errors, so I would not get pregnant before we were ready for any more kids, if we wanted more. And my husband was in full support of this. So I told my husband that I would be taking on overseas projects for my company that I was working in, because the returns were very attractive and I was certain of promotions and the likes if I went. My husband had looked at me skeptical about it and my decision too, and he voiced out his complaints about my choice. He had asked how sure I was that I would get the promotion in the end because it was not everyone that helped with international expansions of companies that got the promotions. He further explained that it might be my superior that ends up getting promoted after all my hard work, but I was adamant and assured him that I would work extra hard to get it for myself. My husband had looked like he was holding in a laugh at my words, but he suppressed the urge to burst into laughter at my little wholehearted speech and instead gave me words of encouragement, saying that he supported me and was rooting for me. I had teased him, saying that I would treat him to an expensive meal in a famous 5-star restaurant after I got my promotion, and my husband played along, saying that he was looking forward to my keeping the promise. All of this happened 3 days before I was supposed to leave home for the trip abroad. The trip was supposed to be an overseas trip to facilitate the expansion of the company. It was actually a branch of the company abroad, and I had been selected to help with the establishment of the branch and stabilize it for the next year. Of course, I would get chances to come home for breaks, every member of the team would, and I was grateful for that. But now that I look at it, I should have listened to my husband and refused to be part of the team that would go on the trip because it was on that particular trip that I met Xerxes. So it was the D-Day, and I was as giddy as I was in my junior year, excited for a school field trip. And my husband mentioned this, reminding me of a childhood picture of me that he had seen in my family album. Winston drove me to the airport where I was to meet my colleagues, and I kissed him goodbye, promising to call once I had landed, even as I waved enthusiastically while I made my way to where my colleagues were waiting for me. I made sure to call Winston as soon as I touched down, as promised, and he was very happy. Things were going so well as my team and I quickly got to work the very next day and set about putting things in order. After a struggling month, we were finally deemed ready to launch properly by the inspecting executives, so an official meeting was scheduled, and that was where I met Xerxes. Xerxes was an executive of the company. In fact, he had been one of the pioneers of the main branch, the headquarters of the company, and had traveled from headquarters to the new branch to secure the site and start construction and networking. Once Xerxes had finished with his task, he reported back to the headquarters to his fellow pioneers, who happened to be close friends of his. During the scheduled meeting, Xerxes kept staring at me like he knew me. His gaze was intense and too heated to be considered normal. I managed to make it through the meeting, and the executives in attendance were ushered by my direct superior to the reservation that had been for them, while I packed up and prepared for the company dinner for the staff. Just as the others left the room, Xerxes came back in, shutting and locking the door before he came close to me to speak. He stood so close to me like we were in an intimate relationship, and it left me breathless and sweaty, and I could barely focus with all of the hot man aura enveloping me. Xerxes had said that he wanted us to meet again later in the evening after we had finished the board meeting, but I declined, stating that I had to attend the company dinner in the evening to get to know some of the other employees and not just the executives. Xerxes had looked at me incredulously, promising me that it would be much more interesting to spend the evening with him than with random strangers, and I had pointed out that he was also a stranger. Xerxes looked shocked but quickly recovered, saying that meeting him would give both of us the chance to get to know each other so we would not be total strangers anymore. He was quite the smooth talker, and I found my resolve crumbling, but I decided to stay strong, postpone the evil for another day. So I replied that I would see him on another evening because I did not want to miss the company dinner that night. Of course, he could tell that I was married. I always wore my wedding band, but Xerxes assured me that my marital status would not make a difference, and also that he had no intention of harming my marriage, and he could very well be in a relationship with me despite my marital status anytime, any day. He held me and murmured that I was even more beautiful than I had been when he had first seen me a year ago. I was taken aback, but there was this giddy feeling in my chest at the thought of such a fine specimen of man being so flirty with me. I had to fight the arousal that threatened to pass through me. I blurted out an excuse and ran out of the meeting room, all while Xerxes watched me, amused, and I left with my heart beating wildly in my chest. Xerxes was there at the venue of the company dinner, though he sat closer to the executives, while I helped my superior pass their orders to the waiters and helped with the drinks. I felt eyes on me, eyes which, not surprisingly, were Xerxes, tracking my every move like a hawk watching prey, and I felt a sudden thrill. It felt good to have someone so interested in me, and I loved it. To cut the long story short, I agreed to Xerxes' advances after the company dinner, and we fell into bed a week after, and I had my eyes open to new dimensions of pleasure, and all thoughts of Winston almost flew out of my head completely because Xerxes had it all. Power, money, fame, and physical traits that complemented me even more than Winston's. I entered into a relationship with Xerxes, and it was quite the beneficial relationship, if you ask me. Because like I said, Xerxes had the power and influence that I craved. He was essentially looking for a beautiful, trustworthy woman to hang off his arm as he secured partners at galas and parties, I'm sure. I began to hop planes, going on spontaneous trips and lying to Winston that I was going on business trips. Of course, I had gotten a promotion after my first trip abroad, and I used that as the perfect excuse to travel out of the country or city, whichever was the case when Xerxes was involved, as I pleased, which was quite frequently. I think that was when Winston may have begun to feel left out or neglected. I tried to cover up and tie the loose ends at home by pretending to be extra needy whenever I was home with Winston, and initiating intimacy more often, sort of like an apology for leaving him high and dry too much. But it was also to sell the frankly obvious lie that the overseas trips were making me needy, and that I missed Winston so much. Winston asked me one night to take it easy, but I had gotten defensive and told him that I needed to work like that to feed my ambitions, and to stop the feeling of inferiority and being useless from eating me up. I even cried in his arms, and Winston had spent hours comforting me. It hurt somewhere in my chest at my actions, but I stumped the feeling down so quickly that it was almost like it never popped up in the first place, and continued with my act. Winston had assured me that it would all be fine and that he would support me no matter what decision I took, and he would be around to help me up if I ever broke down or anything. I was actually not overworked. I was quite relaxed and well pampered by Xerxes, the very wealthy and adventurous Xerxes who spoiled me rotten, and I could not get enough of him or his wealth and power. It was around a year into my adventure that my tricks began to get old and started to work less and less. Winston got smarter, and it started to show. Winston started to show less support for my work, often expressing his displeasure in my leaving home for weeks on end and returning sometimes exhausted, sometimes with suspiciously new and extravagant things. One night, all my secrets came to light, and that's how I got here in the first place, with my family looking at me. My husband began to give details of my affair with Xerxes, details that I was certain that only Xerxes himself and I were privy of, and I started to shake and cry. Winston had a notebook with detailed entries with dates and activities that had my parents' eyes bulging wide open. My brothers looked disgusted, and my sisters were beyond embarrassed. No one wanted to hear about how their sibling was frolicking with some rich sugar daddy. My father just shook his head and asked Winston to continue. He wanted to hear it all, wanted the family to hear it all. And I had to know too. My husband had put a tail on me, and quite the meticulous one, that provided him with pictures, short footages, and his notebook or journal had these details carefully penned down, and I began to wonder how and where he had hidden such a distinct book that I had not seen before. I found out that the tale had been someone who could access the exclusive venues I went with Xerxes to, and also the private areas Xerxes could enter too, and it was my husband's doing. He had paid quite the hefty amount for it from our joint account, which I did not even suspect with how much money was rolling into my private accounts from Xerxes, and new connections I had made in the course of my relationship with Xerxes. The tales fed my husband the details of all my movements and arrangements. I had gotten careless because I felt that with Xerxes I could do anything, but I had forgotten that before Xerxes I was just a simple woman who could and definitely would have eyes following her, while Xerxes was an untouchable man who nothing he did could come back to bite him. The dreaded tape was of my most recent trip with Xerxes to a certain private island that Xerxes had purchased to entertain business partners, and also for him to relax on personal holidays. I had told my husband that the company had assigned me to another overseas job, to oversee another branch that had been established abroad, and that following my supposed promotion, which was actually true. I remember Winston giving me a deadpan expression, a look of disgust passing across his features so quickly that I did not see it properly because it did not stay long, before he suddenly gave a weak smile and told me that he would be rooting for me. I tried to sell the lie and asked if he could see me off again like the last 2 times, but he said he had an early day on the day of my trip, and if things don't go well, he might have to work overtime on the day before my trip.
No.
Winston had asked me after one of my trips if I was open to having more children, but I remember that I had brushed him off, stating that my work life was too hectic with my promotion and increased duties to have a child. I had argued that the stress alone would be capable of endangering a pregnant, talk less of the child, that I might not be able to breastfeed like my first 2. In actuality, it was because a pregnancy would lead to my relationship with Xerxes ending too soon, and I needed to keep using the influence I got from being with Xerxes until I could get enough of what my greed craved. I still needed to get more money and power. I still wanted to be recognized. My husband admitted that he had not really received the video as he had earlier stated. He explained that he had been following me, and that he had filmed Xerxes and I himself, so the tape was an original one, and he showed my father his phone to prove this. My mother leaned over at my father's side to take a look at the phone, and I watched her eyes roll to the back of her head, and she promptly passed out on the couch, thankfully falling against my father on the couch. My father, overcome by rage, shifted my mother into my oldest sister's lap and stood up from the couch. He approached me menacingly, and I only heard his hand sail through the air. I did not really see his hand till it connected with my cheek, leaving a big, red, stinging bruise on my flushed skin. It took everything I had to keep myself from crying. I looked up at my dad and saw the man looking at me with such anger and hatred that I wanted to shrink and disappear into thin air from fear. And don't get me started in what my siblings look like right now, with the eldest daughter fanning our panting mother with a hand fan and staring daggers at me from where she sat with our mother. The sound of Winston clearing his throat brought me out of my thoughts, and I looked just as everyone turned to look at the man with the most hatred burning in his eyes. Winston simply stated that he wanted a divorce, and my heart sank, literally dropped into my stomach, and I began to cry and protest, earning flabbergasted looks and equal looks of disgust in the process. It was not like I could lie, though. My only argument there was that I would end things with Xerxes and even leave the job at the company and do just about anything for Winston to trust me again, and not go ahead with the divorce he had just spoken of. But Winston just shook his head, demanding to know which world I had thought such a thing could happen, and I was rendered speechless. My mother had woken up at this point and just stared at me with a look that translated as, "What in the name of all things holy are you going on about?" I tried again, assuring Winston that I would do anything. Heck, I even confessed that the time Winston had apparently captured on tape was supposed to be the last time I would ever have to meet Xerxes. I tried to explain that it was something like a contract, and I was already going to end it even before Winston found out. Winston raised a brow and asked me to explain further, to which I replied that I was not lying, and I really had no intention of doing anything with Xerxes anymore, to which Winston only laughed, a hoarse, dry thing that was anything but amused or anything like that. That laugh was one of disbelief and incredibly mocking. Winston asked if I was tripping or if I was just that dense, saying that the trust he had in me was already broken, and any confidence he had in my faithfulness was already gone for good, and all that was left was simply a husk of the former love, if what was left of his feelings for me could even be called love at this point. I was speechless at this, and I just looked up at him as he squatted down to be near eye level with me as he said all that. I ended up stuttering that I would do nothing of sort ever if Winston agreed to take me back. I was looking to my family for any sort of backup, but they all just looked at me disappointedly, shaking their heads at me, and I realized that I was all on my own. I was quite literally done for here. Winston sighed and rubbed his face, shaking his head at me before he got to his knees in front of me and held onto my shoulders, holding me steady as he looked straight into my eyes with the coldest expression I had ever seen in my life. And then Winston was wiping my eyes with his palms and petting my cheeks, and I began to shake at his actions, my whole body trembling in what I could only interpret as fear, especially when Winston was touching me. There was no sign of affection in his movements and gestures at all. Winston told me that crying would actually do nothing to help, and that I should quit it with the begging because he would soon get angry enough to hit me, and he did not want to hit a woman, especially one as physically delicate as I was, since he did not want to add to the throbbing that Xerxes' hard pounding had caused my body to have. It was mocking. Winston's tone was absolutely, completely downright mocking, and I saw my father wince from the corner of my eye. Winston went on to tell me that the divorce papers had already been prepared, and all it needed to become valid were the signatures, and it would be in my best interest to sign so we could get the marriage annulled as quickly as possible so we could go our separate ways. Winston got up after his cold words, and turned to face my family. He bowed to my father, who asked him to get up, saying that there was no need since the family had disgraced Winston, but Winston shook his head, saying that respect to elders is due, and he bore no grudge against the family in general. He only hates me and not the family as a whole. My parents thanked him for this, and my older brothers and father saw him out, escorted him to the front door, and watched him drive off, no doubt to get the divorce papers. Just as Winston left, my family turned to me and I felt a panic rise in me. I had to shift back a bit because I was scared, and I did not know what to expect with the looks I was getting from everyone. My mother had somewhat recovered and was ready to face me, to look at me. See, the full details of my blunder came out fully along with the divorce papers around 2 weeks later, in the presence of both my family and my in-laws, Winston's immediate family. The biggest disgrace I had ever experienced in my life, sitting on my knees in the middle of the beautifully decorated living room of my in-laws, with the wedding dress that I had inherited from my lovely mother-in-law, as they all watched me and waited for me to sign the divorce papers, all while they were listening to what Winston had to say. Yes, a strange turn of events, but it was something that had to happen to ensure that I faced enough humiliation to begin to atone for my sins. Winston began to narrate after the papers, already bearing Winston's signature, had been placed in front of me. On the day the video had been shot, I and Xerxes were out on the patio behind the luxury mansion he had on his private island. No guests to entertain this time, so it was Xerxes, myself, and his helpers on the island. Helpers that he shooed away after they had served us our meals so Xerxes and I could have some alone time. The woman was obviously me. I did not like to wear my engagement ring after my wedding, as I preferred my wedding band because I did not want the bulk on my finger, so my husband had gotten new rings and modified them so we could use them as an alternative. From the angle of the video and how the camera seemed to be shaking a lot, and the sound of labored breathing, it sounded like whoever had shot the video was panicking, or maybe the shock was getting to the cameraman. Well, the person behind the camera was angry, and the shaking was from shock and anger mixing dangerously together into one. Winston was the cameraman. Winston had followed me to the airport without my knowledge. He had watched me get on a different flight from the team from the office. That is, he had watched me dodge the group and move to wait for another plane. I had booked a completely different flight. Winston had gotten on the next plane headed towards my new destination almost right after I had left, and he had his contact, the tail, follow me closely till he arrived in the country I was headed. And once the tail had gotten the details of where I was headed, from the taxi I had boarded, which was taking me to a small hangar on the outskirts of the actual city where I had touched down. Xerxes was waiting for me there with his private helicopter that would take us to his private island just off the coast for us to spend the month or so that I was supposed to be gone. Winston couldn't follow us by air, so he had gotten a boat from another contact of his to follow us, but not too closely else he was discovered. We touched down on a helipad on the island, and Xerxes was there to welcome me while he signaled to his helpers to help me with my luggage. Winston had an insider in the island home. One of the live-in stewards was a friend, and had been the one who hid Winston for an entire week while he monitored me and gathered all of the evidence. Winston had watched me when he could and had the steward he knew watch me when he couldn't be there. He had seen me being all lovey-dovey with another man and enjoying myself in another man's arms, watching me enjoy pleasures and luxury while I was deceiving him and frolicking around with a man. Winston had headed back home after around a week of surveillance and confirming for himself the information his contact had given him. and also getting the video that would serve as definite evidence. He has gone home via the boat that had brought him to the island, as well as the first flight home, and he waited patiently for 2 weeks to pass, picking up the phone whenever I made a routine call to ask how he was doing, like I usually did when I actually went on work trips, or rather when I left the house just to keep up the good wife act. It was around a week before I was supposed to be back home that I had gotten a bunch of calls, frantic, urgent calls from home, from my parents and siblings ordering me to head to the family house as soon as I touched down, suitcase and suit on without any need to go home and change. Which would bring us back again to the previous situation where I had been on my knees back in my family house as my tape player in the background, and I walked into the living room to see a live action of myself bouncing on a man's lap, outdoors, on an island. And then there's the current situation, where my activities are once again revisited, but in the presence of not just my family, but also my in-laws. It was at the end of the video and Winston's narration, his clear evidence of my sins, that he finally looked me in the eye and frowned, which caused me to flinch and almost back away at the coldness in his eyes. Coldness that told of a man who was done with me and had erased me from his mind. He rolled his eyes at me and took his seat again while my father cleared his throat but did not say anything for a while. Just looked at me and then my mother before he finally spoke. He started by asking me if I understood where everything was going, to which I nodded a yes, and he nodded back before turning to face Winston and my in-laws. My father started with an apology before going on to say that he was not aware that the child he had raised and whose hand he had given in marriage to an innocent man who went well would turn out like this and bring shame to both families. He asked that my in-laws bore no grudge, and that they should consider my kneeling before them, and the divorce is the first step towards an apology, which although would not be able to gloss things over at all, would still be a step towards peace. He explained that he did not want Winston's family to look upon mine in a negative light, and that I would be the one to carry my sins, but that for the sake of friendship and the bond we had formed as family on the day I married Winston, that the matter should be settled with a clean divorce, which would have the full blessing of the families and any other punishment they deem fitting for me. Winston's father nodded at this and said that he did not hate anyone. He was only sad that his child had gotten his heart shattered by the very woman that he adored, and that it was obvious that a divorce was the logical cause of action since it was what Winston wanted, what he had pushed for. My father-in-law also said that since my father had given his permission, I would also face a punishment by Winston's family to atone for my sins, and then he was looking at me, both men, my father and Winston's. I nodded at them before I thought better of it, and I said that I would take the punishment and bowed as an afterthought, which thankfully seemed to please both men, so I was signaled to sign the divorce papers, which I quickly did, the pen scratching on the paper as I added my signature and full name, maiden name to it, and raised my head, raising it up for them to see and for Winston to take. Winston took it and put it back in the envelope while I was sort of just ignored in favor of everyone present speaking to each other, while I just continued to kneel, enduring the shame that washed over my entire being. I could not help the urge that came over me to bow my head again and sob and cry silently as I continued to deliberate on my matter. To cut the long story short, after that very eye-opening dose of shame and humiliation, I was asked to go and get my things and move back to my family home with immediate effect. Since I had signed the papers, I would need to face my punishment immediately as soon as possible, which was actually a light and simple thing, considering that Winston had taken the time to pack up and arrange my suitcases and all my luggage for me. He thankfully did not take the car that we had bought for me together. He had told me to consider it a sort of parting gift and a thank you for the initial love and the good memories. I felt tears sting my eyes once again, but I stumped it down, blinking hard and nodding my head instead of answering him with words for fear that my voice might crack if I tried to speak. Winston gave me a strange look, observed me as I loaded all of my stuff into the car. I was told that I could keep the ring since I was quitting my job. I could sell the more expensive one and keep me for a bit while I found a new job. Winston only said goodbye to me and stated that the next time we would be meeting would be in court to finalize the divorce, and also another family meeting since my punishment had been decided, but it was not in his place to tell me. I agreed and left, looking back at Winston as he went back into the house that I once called home but could not any longer. Update. So yeah, like I said before, and like you might have seen, I messed up really badly and now I am nothing short of a disgrace to womanhood. I mean, who would cheat on their husband so carelessly and be caught and disgraced to the point of becoming the subject of the family meeting, up to the extended family even? So, like I mentioned, the divorce was a very quick affair and my family was in support. That is, they gave their full support. blessings and they advocated for custody of the children to be given to my husband, ex-husband, and that I would have no more say in anything relating to the children's life other than stipulated visits issued by the courts on weekends that my husband would choose himself. Yes, as unbelievable as that sounds. It wasn't the court that decided that I stay out of the children's life, though. It was a unanimous agreement between my family and that of my husband to keep me from corrupting the children. Winston said he would let me see the children during holidays, but he did not want me anywhere near the children before holidays. But if I was visiting or if the children were to visit, it would be in my family house under the close observation of my parents or my siblings. At least someone older than me had to be in the room. Of course, I disagreed with this absurd and beyond abnormal development, but I was quickly shut down when Winston asked me if I really wanted to see the children or not. Xerxes is a thing of the past. I didn't see him anymore and he didn't contact me. Crossed my heart, but Winston never forgave me, no matter how much I tried to get back in his good graces. Not to remarry, though, but to at least be allowed to be closer to the children again. But I was turned down, even by my family. The children were no doubt mine, but I would only be a bystander in raising them. Winston, my family, and my former in-laws would play the major roles in their upbringing. I might as well have become a distant aunt of theirs. Winston reminded me that I was the one who had made my bed, and I would have to lay on it as I had made it. It was too late for regrets, and I cannot turn back time. I was unhappy, and I was essentially a zombie at work, moving on autopilot, all while I still worked to deal with the settlement I was supposed to pay to my husband and his family, though not a verdict of the court, but a family tradition in the event of divorce, because it was my fault that the marriage had ended in a divorce. So I would be the one settling the family, and my family was in support of this, since I needed to pay my dues. Of course, the settlement money was coming from my paycheck and also from the money I had stockpiled during my time with Xerxes. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I just hadn't been a sucker for Xerxes' sweet talk and charms, if I hadn't been such a sucker for wealth and so power-hungry. I sometimes wonder how Xerxes was doing on most days, since I had called the whole thing off so abruptly and had changed my number and also resigned from the company to find a new job elsewhere, a step to showing my parents that I was ready to change and do right. It would not be hard for a man like Xerxes to find me, but I would rather enjoy my time of freedom before he would ultimately come find me and probably ruin it. But until then, I'd just do the needful.